Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course preview for this week's CJ Cup Byron Nelson. Gonna go through TPC Craig Ranch, go over all the course details that you need to know before going out there, getting your research started, whether it's for DFS or over there for some outright betting. Gonna go through all those details to get you ready. So some course details, a little bit of a hole-by-hole breakdown, some key stats, my modeling, as well as a few comp courses around the PGA Tour that I'm using for my analysis. So gonna keep this quick, concise, to the point for you guys. Let's start it off with a look at TPC Craig Ranch. This course is going to be a birdie fest, so you're going to see something likely at least 20 under par win this thing, sometimes close to 28 under par like we had occasionally get to a few years ago, which might be surprising if you take a look at the length of this golf course, right? It's just a par 71. It does have 3 par 5s, but it's over 7,400 yards, and that includes some par 4s that are drivable, closer to like 310, 330 yards, which really adds to that distance, right? Those longer holes, the par 3s, those longer par 4s can be absolutely brutal. So when we go hole by hole, you'll see some of that ball striking difficulty, but the greens and around the greens at TPC Craig Ranch are where it gets so easy. So when we go through the stat averages, you're going to see that the scrambling is a lot easier to come by here. You don't have very many 3-putts, and in terms of those birdies being made, a lot being made from like 8 to 20 feet. So we'll talk about all that later, but in terms of course agronomy, just to make sure we're all on the same page out here, your greens are about average in size, about 6,800 square foot. And in terms of your grass types, you've got bent grass on the greens, you've got zoysia grass fairways, and everything else is going to be Bermuda. So the Bermuda grass, very typical of a Texas style golf course. I would say that the zoysia grass is maybe the atypical part out there. So when we're looking at putting stats, make sure you're looking at bent grass in terms of your historical averages. And then outside of that, nothing much that we need to include in our modeling, right? This Bermuda grass tees, rough fairways, all of that is pretty typical and nothing that I'm going to be accounting for in my analysis. The things that we want to focus on here are some of the stat averages around here. So like I mentioned, though the ball striking actually is a little bit harder to come by than you might expect, everything is easier than tour average. So your fairway is about 3% higher at this golf course than what you've seen on the typical PGA Tour event, and that's over the last 3 years at the Byron Nelson. Your green average is about 4% higher than your tour average. Your scrambling rate about 8% higher than tour average. You can see 3-putt percentage, right? It's like a 1.5% lower compared to what we're used to seeing. Your birdies are higher, your bogeys are lower. I think you get the point at this stage. This is not one of the harder tracks that we see on the PGA Tour, and it is all about that scoring. And when we get to a scoring fest or a birdie fest, as some may put it out there, it is almost always about the approach play and then the putting, right? It's setting up birdie looks in that 8 to 20 foot range and then going out there and converting on it. And when we take a look at the past champions, top 5 finishers, even just the shots gained metrics of some of your top players over the last few years, you'll see that, right? It's extremely evident. So if there's one category that people can lose in and still win this golf tournament or still finish high around the Byron Nelson, it's around the green, right? Because if you're missing a lot of these greens, if you're not ball striking it well for any given week, well, that's a surefire way for you to go out there and not win the golf tournament. So where you see a lot of this dark green is with approach, over there with the putting, like you're used to seeing at one of these easy golf courses, but it's been like that over the last 3 years. So we go back to 2023, you'll see that it's a bunch of gains on approach, and of course over here with the putter, I should say 2022, that is there last year. And then year before that, when Gsluke also won this event, a lot of dark green in that approach and the putting. So all of that is very typical of a golf course that plays this easy. And when we go hole by hole, you're going to see where you can really differentiate yourself, because I know the winning score is super low out there, but how you get to 28 under par, right, over a 4-round sample size is not just cleaning up on the 3 par 5s. It's not just going out there and birdieing the drivable par 4s. It's mixing in a birdie or two on some of those longer par 4s. So let's go hole by hole. Let me show you what I'm talking about here, because you get a good mix of scoreable holes around this TPC Craig Ranch and a lot of difficult holes mixed in too. So first off, hole number 1, a little bit of a handshake. It is a wedge in, so should be a birdie look for a solid amount of players. Hole 2, a little bit longer, right close to 470 yards, but not one of the brutal holes that you have around here. So still requires probably a mid-iron in for most players, but around the green, you can see there's not much to contend with, right? A little chipping hollow here to the back left, a little pop bunker to the back front right, I should say, but the greens are very flat. They're not running very quickly at just 11.5 on the stimp meter, so you're going to have a lot of players getting up and down there. 3 is 428, another little bit of a layup and then a wedge in. So kind of like you had for hole number 1. Hole 4 is your first taste of a par 3 around here, and it is one of the longer par 3s too, so definitely a long iron in, but because the greens aren't all that severe, you get it on the surface, and you're probably going to have like at most 25, 30 feet for birdie, if not closer, which could be a good luck. 5 is your first par 5. This one is 576. This is reachable for everyone in 2 if you hit a good drive, but if you get a little bit out of position, you're probably laying up, which still leaves you a pretty good chance at birdie. 6 is your first quote-unquote drivable par 4. Now, this isn't going to be reachable for pretty much anyone unless they move up the tee box, but you can try and send a driver out there about 30, 40 yards short of the green and leave yourself with just a chip for a birdie. So it's a real easy hole. Even if you lay up, it's still going to be a wedge in, which should be a birdie look for most players. 7 is your second par 3, so it's over 230 yards, the longest par 3 on this golf course. 8 is 484, and this is really our first taste of where I think you can separate yourself from the field. These longer par 4s, I guess hole 2, right, is nearly 470, so I guess it's getting pretty burly there as well. These holes where they're nearly 500 yards are where you're going to win and lose the golf tournament, right? Those par 5s that you're trying to reach into, those shorter par 4s, everyone is going to make birdies on. And where you go out there and you get to 20 plus under par is by mixing in 1 or 2 birdies on these kind of holes. So this requires a long iron. It's why there are so many shots from 175 to 200 here. Also, there are so many shots from 200 to 225 yards. Part of that is the par 3s, and then it comes with a lot of these longer par 4s. So that's an example of that type of hole. 9 is your second par 5, so as long as you hit a good drive here and you're not blocked out by the trees on the right or this fairway bunker on the right side, you should be able to give this one a go in 2. Hole 10 is 472, so another one of those longer par 4s that you can potentially separate yourself from the field on. 11 is 456, so a mid-length par 4, so there's only a few of them on property. Like just off the top of my head, 2, right, is one of those mid-length par 4s. You get the same thing there at hole 11. 12 is actually a par 4, so they're not going to tee off from this back tee box. Last year, they either used this one right here or even the one tee box up. So it'll be a par 4. The driving zone will be a little bit further down this fairway where it actually gets a little bit skinnier. But this hole, I mean, if they played it as a par 5, it would just be absolutely nuked. You're even going to still see birdies there out there as a par 4 format. 13 is 500 yards, so you have that long par 4 and then another one right after. And these are the type of holes where you win or lose it, like I said before. Just because, not everyone's going to make birdie there, so if you do, it's a real good way to just jump up in terms of your shots gained and your overall position on the leaderboard. 14 is 332. This is drivable pretty much regardless of what tee box they use. And if it's playing into the wind, you probably see a little bit more of a layup approach. But if it's playing downwind, players are going to take full send at that thing. 15 is your second to last par 3. It is 215 yards, so has some length, also a little bit of water to the left. 16 is a longer par 4, another one of those burly holes where, if you make par, you're doing a pretty good job, but if you can find a way to make a birdie, it would be huge for your overall score. 17 is your shortest par 3. It's only 173 yards. I would say the most difficult green on the golf course, though. And then 18 is a finishing par 5, and this is not shortened. This is going to be a par 5 out there for the players, and it is reachable in 2 with a little bit of water in front. So there's enough room here where most players are going to take it on anyways. There's not as much risk, right, when you have this whole 15, 20 yard collar. But if you end up mishitting the ball, right, and not getting it over that hazard, you've seen players have some trouble at 18. So it's a little bit of a risk reward hole. It's not quite like what you get at 15 at Augusta, right, where you have the water pretty much right against the green, but still pretty fun finishing hole. You're going to see a lot of scoring there. Definitely a birdie for your champion, I have to assume, unless they're going in there with a 5-shot lead. So it's a pretty good hole, I'd say, to finish the round, and one where you could make a big number, but a majority of players are probably going to get out of there with a birdie. Now that we've seen this golf course, let's head over to Bet the Number, which of course is the sponsor of these videos. Bet the Number is the database that I use for a lot of my modeling to go out there, do research on players, and it's what we use during these videos to bring you the breakdown. So let's go ahead, take a look at what they're using for their modeling this week to give an idea of the sort of key stats to keep an eye on for this kind of golf course. And what I really love about Bet the Number is not just the database side, right? The data, the detailed course data that they have here, including, how much you can hit driver, right? They tell you whether it's a bomber's paradise or not. You can see it is a bit of a bomber's paradise right here at a 7.5 out of 10. You can see this sort of around the green shots that players are facing, the approach distribution, all of that extremely helpful. But what I find even more helpful from Bet the Number, frankly, is their modeling, right? Because they have multiple people on staff, the creators of this website and database, that work with PGA Tour pros on their strategy, right? So they're going to most of these events, especially the bigger time ones like the majors and signature event sort of fields, and getting, first off, feedback from the players, and second off, they know what is necessary for success at any given golf course, right? Because they're telling this the PGA Tour players, right? And if a PGA Tour player is listening to those sort of people, then I'm going to be all ears, right, from the betting perspective, right? I'm not a player. I'm not on these golf courses nearly as much as these other people are. So, well, why not lean into that insight? And what they're looking at this week, and what I really was hoping to see, is some of the long iron stuff, right? I mentioned that those longer par fours are probably where you're going to separate yourself in the field, and that's essentially what they're agreeing with here, right? They're taking, a lot of emphasis on regular shots gained approach. You can see that over here. If you go through their modeling, you can get the percentages. All that is part of Bet the Number. So check it out. You can get all of those exact percentages from them. But I like that they're adding on this 175 to 250 range. All of your par threes are at least 175 yards. And then a majority of the tougher holes on property, right, you're hitting a mid to long iron in. So players that separate yourself there, you can see right at the top of the list. But the ones that really stick out, the ones with a larger sample size, you've got guys like Nate Lashley there. He's always a really good iron player, but in general, with the longer stuff, is even better than your tour average. Kevin Yu, Luke List making the top end of that board. They've got Tom Hoagie there. Again, just one of the best iron players in the world to begin with. Great to see him doing it with the long stuff. But Jake Knapp, right, he won at the Mexico Open, another course with a lot of longer par fours. Doug Gim, right, he's played well at those sort of tracks. Ben Martin, another guy that is just, he's long off the tee to begin with. I don't think people give him credit for that, but also extremely talented the further away from the hole that you are. So, we can go through this list. There's a lot of guys that gain to the field in this category, right? Aaron Rye, Johnny Vegas, Alex Noren, etc., etc. But it's good to see that Bet the Number was weighing that in their modeling as well. So that's something that I'm going to be adding onto my model when I go out there and run it for myself. And again, just to kind of have that confirmation bias out there with Bet the Number is a nice little added bonus. The other thing I want to look at, and I'm super glad that they made it one of their top key stats for this week, is birdie or better percentage, right? When you've got to get to 25, maybe even like 30 under par to win this golf tournament, you need players that are capable of posting 7-8 birdies around. And if we just sort this by birdie or better percentage, that's what BOB percentage means, by the way. Birdie or better percentage. We've got Ben Yan up there, Mark Hubbard, Thomas Dietrich, Taylor Pendrith, all players that are popping in that category. Tom Hoagie, Jordan Spieth, right? Spieth, maybe not having the best year, but still posting a shit ton of birdies. That is kind of important to see. Same thing with Taylor Pendrith, right? Not having his best season. Even guys like Thomas Dietrich, he's had a little bit more success than those other two players, but they're going out there and making birdie on 25% of their holes. And to go out there and get to 30 under par, you're going to need to do that, if not better, at this sort of golf course. Few other guys I want to point out here. Tom Kim, another guy not playing that well in terms of the results, but is making a shit ton of birdies, so you'd like to see that at a birdie fest. Adam Scott, same thing, right? Maybe not the most consistent form of late, right? His best finish is what, like a T14 at Valero, which that would definitely be below his expectations over the last 5 events, right? He's still making a crap ton of birdies there. Justin Suh, Sam Ryder, players that I'd be keeping an eye on there. At a golf course that's a birdie fest, you need guys that can make birdies. So important to include in the modeling, and great to see over there from Bet the Number. A few other key stats I want to point out here. So they've got the putting from 8 to 15 feet. Now, proximity buckets for approach play, I'm a little bit more willing to use. For putting, it's a little bit more of an unknown to me. So this is one where I'm going to trust the Bet the Number guys out there. Again, I'm not as much of a specialist when it comes to the golf courses as people that are working with PGA Tour pros week in, week out. And if they think this 8 to 15 foot range is going to be important, then I'm going to lean into that, right? I'm going to trust the guys that Bet the Number because frankly, they know a lot more than I do about this, right? And I like to think that I know a lot about it, right? I do this every week. I do course breakdowns and whatnot, but not as much, right, as actual experts in the field. So take my analysis with a grain of salt, and I'd say honestly trust these guys even more than me. So if we're going through this, you can see Matt McNeely's up there, and I think the thought process on this 8 to 15 foot range is that it's a birdie fest, or you have a lot of like the shorter par fours, those par fives, where you're going to have something in this range for birdie. making those putts is going to be important, right? And at a birdie fest, if you can make more of those scoring chances, right, that's a lot of times how you get to the top of the leaderboard. So I think that's the idea of what they're doing here. And you got Matt McNeely up there. Steven Yeager is not always the best putter, but from this range, you can see he's a lot better than his normal putting stats. So that's interesting to me. You can see over here, right, Adam Scott is a plus player in that range. Adam Shank, Bramlett, that's surprising. Right? He's not the best putter, but he's good from that range. Are all players that I'm going to give a little bit of a boost this week as well. Now, if we're going to circle back to just your regular old shots gained, your best approach players, you can see them up here. A lot of players you'd expect to see. Tom Hoagie, best iron player in the world, not named Scotty Scheffler. You've got Keith Mitchell, Willie Z up there, Jake Knapp again, who I know the form isn't great, but at least he's hitting his irons pretty well. So he's got that going for him. But Novak, maybe a little bit of a sneaky play there. Hubbard played really well at the team event, was completely carrying him and Brem. So I like to see that. Grayson Sigg coming off a really good week at the Zurich as well. A lot of guys that played this past weekend that played well, like Aaron Rye too. Sam Ryder, like his teammate, him and Hostler did not have a great weekend, but another guy that's striping it on approach are all players that I'd probably give a huge boost to. Now, the reason for that, right, it doesn't matter which proximity bucket you're looking at. Iron play is the most consistent stat on the PGA Tour week to week, right? It's been back tested time and time again the last 5-10 years, no matter what sample you look at. The number one correlator to success from the week before, the last 2-3 weeks before into the next week is the shots gained approach. So you should always be including it, and especially at a birdie fest where you have to be setting up birdie looks. But maybe the most important key stat, right? This 8 to 15 foot range, I think, is a nice little bonus, but you just got to make some damn putts, right, at a birdie fest. You got to be somebody that's putting the ball in the hole. Now, Matt McNeely leads that category, but guys like Nick Hardy surprisingly showing up there, Aaron Baddeley, always going to be one of the best putters on tour. But these sort of players that are gaining a shit ton of strokes with the putter, if they can show me anything with the ball striking, whether it's, elite level iron play, which would be ideal for a lot of those players, or maybe even just popping out there with the long irons, that's going to be the kind of player that I'm looking for. So you can see if we sort this by putting, not a lot of your top end approach players show up. Like the best player on approach up top, right, is a Cheston Hadley, who's not even gaining 0.2 strokes per round. A Tom Kim, right, he's not even gaining 0.2 strokes per round himself. If we go down a little bit further, right, you're not in the elite tier of putting anymore, but you have guys like Lashley that gain with the flat stick, Adam Scott, Ryan Moore, Mark Hubbard. A lot of players that we've already talked about, right, during this key stats section that I think are all pretty decent plays. Where you might want to look for some of these top players, right, is the longer iron stuff, where you can see McNeely is a better player than the guys around him, right? Cheston Hadley, again, right, is a player that's better than a lot of the other guys around him. Matt Wallace, right, another better long iron player than some of the other guys up top. Might have to be a little bit more creative about some of these putting specialists, right? Because let's be frank about it, right? The guys that are really good putters are normally not always the best ball strikers. So you're going to have to open up your ball striking stats a little bit to try and find some of those plays. But those are some of the key stats that I'd be looking at around this golf tournament. All right, and now for a few comp courses that I'm looking at for some of my crossover analysis. So first off, we got the Texas Children's Houston Open, which in the past would not have been as good a comp as what we're going to get for this week. But after they cut down the rough this year, right, they made it a little bit easier. I think it's a pretty good comp course for what we're going to get this week. And there's a couple reasons why. First off, it's a longer course, right? It's a par 70 and it's still 7,400 yards. And the reason for that are some of your longer par fours, right? They have a lot of those 475 to 500 yard par fours over there at that golf tournament, and that's where you're going to separate yourself this week. So from the approach profile, I think there's a lot of similarities from golf course to golf course, and then on top of that, it's another Texas style course with similar agronomy, not the same agronomy. They have bent grass greens this week, which will be different than what we had at the Houston Open, but a lot of the same players that showed up at that week were players that we were just looking at with the recent stats. So like Steven Yeager, right, showed up time and time again, right? We had Aaron Rye showing up quite a bit. If we go back to the year before that, take a look at 2022, you'll see that a few of the players like Alex Noren that we were looking at showed up. Aaron Wright again. Joseph Bramlett, right? He showed up in a few categories for us. Steven Yeager there finishing T9. Go to the year before that one, right? Jason Kokrak won. He's, of course, over there on the Live Tour. But if you go through a few of these others, right? Joel Damon showed up a few times. Martin Trainer even showed up once or twice. A lot of players that are good long iron players here. Now, a lot of the players we're going through aren't actually playing in this field, right? Like Russell Henley, Sam Burns aren't playing this week. Scotty, of course, isn't playing. Kokrak's on the Live Tour, so he's not showing up. Same thing with a Tony Finau. But what we are getting here are ball striking first sort of players, right? So I know I said that this is going to be a little bit of a birdie fest. So I think the Houston Open a little bit more ball striking heavy than what we're going to get this week. But from the ball striking perspective, we're emphasizing a lot of the same sort of key stats. Next up, we have TPC Summerlin. So this is a fall series event. It's I would say one of the easier events that we get on the tour schedule. So we're actually going to have to go back to 2023. I guess to find this on the list, but what you'll see with the Shriners Children's Open in TPC Summerlin is a golf course that has a lot of those longer par fours, but it's still a birdie fest, right? So when we get the course yardage to load in on everything here, you can see fairway average higher than normal, green and regulation average higher than what we're used to seeing. Now the scrambling a little bit harder at the Shriners Children, so that's why the scoring average, right, is a little bit lower than what you're going to get this week. But you can see Tom Kim shows up there, right? He's somebody that was showing up in the modeling time and time again. There's Taylor Pendrith. There's Alex Noren that were showing up. Go back to the year before that, Tom Kim won that again. Tom Hoagie there, right? A lot of maybe off the tee players that aren't always the most stout, like Matt Neesmith, Tom Hoagie, not the best off the tee players. You can even say the same thing about Tom Kim. He's not an elite off the tee player by any means, but an elite tier iron player and can fill it up with a flat stick when he's getting hot. So you're going to see that kind of approach profile there, right? Jason Day, last year's winner, finished T8 back there in 2022. And then the year before that, Sunjae Im won, who by the way won on the Korean PGA Tour this weekend. So good for him. I'm not sure when we're going to see him next. Might even be in the field this week for all I know. But yeah, you see that out there for that form. Outside of those two golf courses, there's not a lot that can really compare here. So I'm going to keep it to those two comps, right? Don't want to go overboard, try and, force something in when trying to find that analysis. More than anything this week, right? I think it's a custom model sort of week, right? To really go out there, hone in on some of the long irons, try and find some guys that excel on that bent grass surface. And I know before we talked about some of the key stats over here and the bet the number model, the only thing I would really add on top of that to make sure you're looking at is bent grass putting, right? I think the 8 to 15 foot range makes a lot of sense, but if you want to add in a little bit more detail to your model, maybe add in some of the shots gained bent grass. You could also take a look at shots gained at Birdie Fest, right? So not necessarily specific courses around the PGA Tour like we had with TPC Summerlin, like we've had there with a few of the comp courses we've talked about, but more so just courses that play easy, right? So they might be a little bit different from how they model and whatnot, but you can still take a look at the easier scoring conditions. So those are a few things I might add to the modeling. You can see over here some of the weighting that they were going with. I love the fact that they're putting birdie or better percentage so high in their modeling. I think this 175 to 250 range is maybe, modeled a little bit too much there. So they had it at 25%. I would probably bring that down closer to like 10%, right? Just make it a little bit of a boost on top and take that extra 15% and throw in the shots gained Birdie Fest. Throw in, right, the shots gained putting on bent grass and try and do it that way. So that's how I'm modeling this week. Those are a few things to keep an eye on to go out there and identify those top plays. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the course breakdown this week. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead, smash that like button for me, subscribe to the channel, and also comment down below what you've got as your winning score of the week. If you can give me the exact number, I'll give you guys a free month of my Patreon page. So go ahead, give me your thoughts down there below, and let's go out there and have ourselves a week. In terms of my guess, I'm going to go with 25 under par. Feels pretty reasonable. We have slightly longer rough this year, so I think that's going to have a little bit of impact on scoring, but still should be an absolute birdie fest. But go ahead, let me know your thoughts down there in the comments. Again, show that love with that like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll go ahead and have ourselves a week. Going to have content dropping on later this evening, going over our betting and DFS preview. So if you're playing on Draftkings, looking to maybe make some outright bets, whatever the case may be, we're going to talk about how I'm approaching the board. So, we went through our key stats, our comps here. That video is going to be using all of that to go out there and identify our top plays, right? So when you run the modeling, you run the numbers, who are the guys that I'm keeping an eye on this week? So stay tuned for that. Subscribe so you don't miss that video when it drops on later on, but that's all I've got for you guys. So best of luck out there with your exposure. Again, comment down below your winning score for a free chance to earn a month of my Patreon.